Hello and welcome back to Solomon's Cave. In this, the third video of my series on Genesis 1 verse 1 and 2, we are looking at the third word of the Bible, Elohim, or God. Let's review a little about word order or sentence structure in Hebrew, so we know what we're looking at here. A common word order is VSO, or verb, subject, object. Though this sentence started with in the beginning or perhaps when began, the second word in the sentence is a normal finite verb describing the action. This means that we would normally expect the next word, or this word, to be the subject, or the actor, or the one doing the bara'ing, which will in turn be followed by the object, or what is bara'at. And since the verb was conjugated as third person, masculine and singular, we know, or we expect, that the written subject, if it is there, will be masculine and singular. That is, and let me state this for the record, grammatically masculine and singular. This may be a little new for native English speakers, but many languages have grammatical gender for nouns in addition to pronouns. So objects can be grammatically masculine or feminine, even if they are not biological at all and therefore have no natural gender. And this is theologically significant as well, for even though the normal way in which the biblical authors talk to or about God is by using masculine nouns, pronouns and verb conjugations, that is in no way an indication that God is biologically male. And now for the singular, for there is something fishy going on here. Something not unique to the word Elohim, as we shall see when we discuss the word for heaven or heavens, for example, but the im ending is a very typical plural ending in Hebrew. This has led to a lot of speculation, as we shall see later in this video, but despite the plural form, all verbs and pronouns that refer to Elohim when it refers to God are always singular rather than plural. But let's first take a step back and only look at the first part of the word, namely El. This is a very common word, and it can mean a ram, a tyrant, a big tree, a pillar, or strength and power. Now keep in mind that these are all simply homonyms. Each time this word appears, it only has one meaning, and the other meanings are not in view here, especially since the words ram, tyrant, big tree and pillar only look like El or Ale when they are shortened from the dictionary form of Ayil. More interesting is of course the meaning God, where it can refer to any and all gods or goddesses, including of course the supreme god whose name was El. And here I mean the supreme god of the pantheon of the Ugaritic gods. Now I won't get into speculations about chicken and egg, as in was El called El because El meant God, or that the name El became the generic name for God since El was the highest god in this pantheon. We'll leave that discussion to linguistic historians. Also, often when you see a name with the first or the last syllable being El, or El, that El or El part often refers to God. For example, Bethel means house of El or house of God, and the name Elnathan means El has given or God has given. So how do we get from El to Elohim? A normal plural would be something like Elim, but instead we get what the dictionary calls an extended plural form with an extra syllable, Elohim. An alternative linguistic solution is that Elohim is the plural not of the word El, but of the word Eloah. And El then is a shortened version of Eloah, and Elohim would be the normal plural. Now, Elohim can either mean gods, plural, when it talks about the gods, plural, of other nations. But here, Elohim is clearly grammatically singular, even if it looks plural. But why a plural-looking word, rather than a normal singular-looking word? There are a few suggestions that people have come up with over the centuries. For example, some have come up with a proto-Trinitarian solution, where the Old Testament authors believed that there was something more than singular about God. Others, from a more critical school of thought, have suggested that it is a remnant of polytheism, where in an earlier version or in an earlier time, the Israelites were polytheists, and Genesis 1 verse 1 would originally have read, "In the beginning the gods created the heaven and the earth." But then, later monotheistic scribes changed the verb to a singular, but kept the plural form of Elohim. Yet others have suggested that this is perhaps a majestic plural, where a monarch sometimes refers to him or herself as we. And then some have suggested that it may refer to the divine council. Now, there is something to be said for all four of these solutions, but I'm not sure whether any or even all of them give a sufficiently satisfying answer. For the first one, there are certainly parts in the Hebrew Bible where there is some unspecified plurality within God. Sometimes there seems to be no distinction between the angel of the Lord, or the Spirit of God, and God Himself. Also, when you look at Proverbs, it seems that some divine attributes are shared with the personification of wisdom, and perhaps most clearly in Daniel, there is an Ancient of Days and a Son of Man as two distinct divine heavenly figures. However, to read all of that back into a plural form of Elohim is a bit of a stretch. There may be a correlation, but that doesn't prove a causation in either direction. Then, about the ancient Israelites being polytheists and only later becoming monotheists with a partial redaction. There is a little bit of truth to this. At certain points in the Bible, we can read that, for example, the patriarchs Abraham before his calling, or Jacob before he fully dedicated himself to God, worshipped other gods. Also, throughout Israel's history, large portions of the population, sometimes with the support of the king, worshipped various other gods. In fact, the prophets spent quite some time describing and condemning this polytheism. But then to assume that later scribes came back to Genesis 1 and changed the verb conjugations, and only the verb conjugations, very consistently from plural to singular, but not either the word God itself or any other context, strikes me as a little bit bizarre. Next, there is the notion of a majestic plural, or a form of a royal we. It sounds fun to our English ears, as well as in some other languages, but there is no indication that I've seen that this was a common practice in ancient Israel, let alone that it would change the way God is addressed or talked about. And then there is the notion of the divine council. This divine council is mentioned a few times explicitly in the Bible, like in the opening chapters of Job, or in the vision of Micaiah son of Imlah. And it may also be envisioned when God, near the end of Genesis 1, says, "Let us make humans in our image, after our likeness," and a few other places. But to have the notion of this divine council so permeate not just the Bible, but also the Hebrew language as a whole, is again quite a stretch, especially given the fact that the divine council doesn't play that big of a role in most of the narrative of the Bible. Now then, the theory that I personally like. Though I'm not able to prove it, it is that it is a plural of greatness. A few other words, most famously heaven, shamayim, and water, mayim, have a plural or a dual-looking form, even if their meaning is often singular. Just look up, or stand on the seashore and look out. How much sky is there? How much water is there? A whole heap of a lot. Therefore, we use a plural sounding form to describe it. And the same is true of God. It is a mighty big God that the Bible is talking about, so why not use a plural form to describe Him? Well, even if my favorite theory is not correct. It is at least one that requires very little theological or linguistic speculation, and it leaves the question of Israel's theological past open-ended. The next question I'd like to tackle is what kind of word is Elohim? Sure, it's a noun, we got that. But there are different types of nouns. For example, proper nouns, or names. Names like Moses, or Deborah, or Jerusalem, or God. Or perhaps it is a title, like we have kings, we have prophets, judges, generals, and gods. Or are we perhaps talking about a species category? There is a horse, there's an oak, there's a human, and then there is a god. So which is it? Is Elohim a name, a title, or a category, or perhaps something else entirely? First, a name. Now it is true that characters both in and outside of the Bible address Elohim as Elohim or God as God. But that doesn't mean it is a name, because you can also address a king as king. Additionally, there are a few things that in Hebrew you can do with the word Elohim, but you cannot grammatically do with names, including putting it in the construct state. See for example Genesis 24 verse 3. Elohei Hashemayim ve'Elohei ha'aretz, the God of the heaven and the God of the earth. You cannot do that with a name. Similarly, you can add a definite article to the front of the word Elohim. See for example a typical formula in Exodus. Vayomer Moshe el ha-Elohim, and Moses said to God. Or, if you want to include a translation of the article, and Moses said to the God. And finally, you can add possessive suffixes to Elohim, for example in the famous confession or prayer in Deuteronomy 6 verse 4. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, which means, Hear Israel, the Lord is our God. None of those things are possible with names, so it is not a name. Then, is it perhaps a title or a category? Here grammar and syntax probably won't help us too much, and so we have to apply a bit of reasoning here. A title is something that can be given. For example, David was anointed and appointed to be a king. The same for Aaron as a priest, and prophets are usually described as that they were called. This is in contrast to a category, for if you are born a human, you will always be a human. Okay, I know there are some belief systems outside of the Bible that talk about humans being reincarnated as different species afterwards, or of humans ascending to godhood, though that doesn't necessarily invalidate the category of categories. So now let's look at some passages and see how Elohim is used. Is it used as a title that is given or granted to something or someone, or is it something that describes an entity's category? Let's start with Isaiah 42 verse 17. Here the prophet is speaking to the people who worship other gods. They trust in carved idols. They say to metal images, You are gods. This seems to indicate that God is a title that can be granted to some object. In this case, an image made of metal. Or what about this interesting comment in the book of Judges, chapter 11 verse 24? The judge Jephthah is speaking to some foreign negotiators. Will you not possess what Chemosh, your God, gives you to possess? And all that the Lord our God has dispossessed before us, we will possess. Here we also seem to have the use of the word God as a title, where having a God is like having a king. Every nation has one, or more than one. But then we come to Jeremiah speaking to unfaithful Israelites. Your children have forsaken me and have sworn by those who are not gods. And again, 2 Kings 19 verse 18, where Hezekiah prays, They cast their idols into the fire, for they were not gods, but the work of man's hands, wood and stone. Here it seems that a certain object is called or given the title God or gods. And here God says that they aren't gods, despite having been granted the title. meaning they are wrongly called gods because they didn't fit the category. And then there is a really difficult and super interesting passage in Psalm 82, which starts out as follows. Elohim has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the Elohim, he holds judgment. And then, at the end of the psalm, it says, I said, you are Elohim, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die, and fall like any prince. Arise, singular verb, Elohim, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Is your head spinning already? Is it a title or a category? It seems to me that it depends on the context. Either can be intended or emphasized. In some cases, the title aspect seems to have the emphasis. For example, when it talks about our God or your God. But at other times, it seems to be the category, the type of entity that is emphasized. Or being within the category is a prerequisite or a necessary condition for the title to be valid. And there you have it, the third word of the Hebrew Bible, introducing the main character of this chapter and the whole book as the creator. Keep in mind, however, that this video, more than some others in this series, contains a lot of my opinion, so don't be surprised if you read other opinions or theories elsewhere. The next video in this series will be about not one but two words. Eighth, we'eth.